Hello. So today we would discuss further the types of questions in IELTS Writing Task 1. So this is a continuation from our previous video where we discussed about the Writing Task 1 and how we are going to approach the Writing Task 1 during our masterclass. And this video is especially for those who want to attend the masterclass in order for them to have a good understanding of the types of questions so that it would be easier for us to discuss the questions in detail or assorted question types in detail during the masterclass. So without further ado, let us go on and discuss the types of questions. Now, the first type of question. Now, overall, we have divided the questions in 5 types. Okay, now these divisions and these categories differ based on, of course, the trainer who would be teaching you. But overall, here we have divided it in 5 different categories. Now, the first one, of course, the pie charts, a very frequent type that you come across. We would discuss the pie charts using some examples. Now, of course, you know what pie charts are, and you've seen them quite frequently during your practice, or simply if you're new to it, then of course you would be seeing it in one of the Cambridge books. So we have taken examples from the official Cambridge tests, and we would be going through these examples for you to understand better how these questions are framed. Now let us look at this first example. As you can see, this is a pie chart, like, a set of pie charts, basically 2 of them, as you can see here. There's an instruction which says the charts below show the proportions of British students at one university in England who were able to speak other languages in addition to English in, of course, 2 years. They've given 2000 and 2010. So there's a year gap. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. That's what they say, right? Now, if you look at the first part, which says you should spend about 20 minutes on this task. So it's a task worth 20 minutes, and you're supposed to simply talk about a summary. You're supposed to summarize the information given, the data given, according to the different variables, the different indicators that they have given, within a matter of 20 minutes max. Within, let's say, of course, there's no maximum word limit as such, but minimum word limit in terms of 150 words. So 150 words, a minimum word limit. Okay, now 20 minutes for the time and 150 minutes, 150 words for the minimum word limit. And we have on our hands a summary of a data given or some data given. Now, if you look at the pie charts, what do they represent? They're representing, as they have given you the topic here already, this is your subject, that they are talking about students at a particular university in England, of course, right? British students who were able to speak additional languages apart from English in 2 years, of course, 2000 and 2010. So if you look at this, 2000 versus 2010, so there's a difference in timeline, right? So this is a comparison of sorts. This is a comparison. So there are variations in which you have single or individual pie chart given. And here is an example where you have multiple pie charts given, and you have to report on the main features and also make comparisons where relevant, as they have mentioned here. So the reading the data or interpreting the data is usually the first step to succeeding in summarizing your information, or summarizing in a logical order, right, to respond to the task and be able to give a coherent summary within a matter of 200 to 50 maximum words. Okay, now usually we have variations on each type, but because we're just going through some sample ones, right now we're limited to a few examples which we would elaborate on later during our masterclass. Okay, now in the second one, we have a different variation of this very pattern. So here we have a mixed sort of presentation where we have the total number of visitors to a certain museum given to you in a table order, basically, alongside 2 pie charts given to you regarding the results of surveys of visitor satisfaction. Now this is a mixed sort where you have mixed pattern of information from 2 different data source, or let's say visual representation. So there is visual representation 1, this is visual representation 2. It's a mixed sort. Now there are some categories where they make a different category altogether of the mixed or the combination ones, but there's no reason for us to complicate it further. We can simply say, okay, you can have a pie, or else you can have multiple pies. You can also have different kinds of visual representation alongside the pie, maybe a bar chart, maybe a table, right? Any sort of, maybe a line graph, right? So basically it's a matter of mixed charts being like a very common representation as well, especially recently. So we have to be comfortable in reading through or interpreting different data sources or different data visualization in order for us to summarize the information coherently. Now, if you look at this, they always give you this clear instruction. They have given you the instruction regarding the subject matter. What is the subject matter? We have here the table which shows the number of visitors to Ashdown Museum. This is the table that they're talking about, and this is regarding what the number of visitors to this museum during the year before and after it was refurbished. And below that, of course, the charts show result of surveys asking for their satisfaction level, in which of course there are changes over the year, or basically before and after refurbishment. So this is a before and after situation. Before versus after. In the previous one, it was a matter of 2000 versus 2010. So it was again a timeline thing. This is also a timeline issue. Of course, the timeline differ. In one, we have a certain date attached to it. In the other one, we have just a, let's say, a phenomena attached to it, right? An event, that there was a refurbishment. So before and after situation, before and after satisfaction levels, before and after responses from the visitors. Now, whatever this is, there's always some sort of comparison, because usually, apart from going through the data in the individual pie chart, usually you would have this sort of comparison going on most of the time. So it's important for you to understand each pie or each table, let's say, whatever other visualization they have given, and also be able to find out the comparison. So we would talk about how to find comparisons, how to find main features, differences in the highest and lowest points, and the other contributing factors to deciding on your summary when going through, let's say, this sort of visualization. Okay. Now, this is just an intro, so we're just like passing through or leafing through each different types. We will talk at length about each of these types when we discuss at length these very like the same problems during our sessions. Now, moving on to another variation. So this variation shows you 3 pies, right? So you have a one on, as you can see, it's something about sodium, other one's about saturated fat, other one's about added sugar, and they have given you these indications of breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. What's the topic? They've given the charts below show the average percentages in typical meals of 3 types of nutrients, all of which may be unhealthy if eaten too much. So of course you can derive your conclusions based on comparison. Now summarize information, again, the same thing, by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. And they have given this sort of the title, that average percentage of sodium, saturated fats, and added sugar in typical meals consumed in the US. And you're supposed to compare the 3 based on the 4 indications, or the 4 types of, let's say, meals. And we can derive conclusions from that, report the data in the most logical manner. And this is not a mixed type, but rather this is like, you can say, multiple charts. So we have multiple charts, right? There's no reason for us to, again, overcomplicate things by making a category out of this, because essentially we're still dealing with pie, right? And again, it's just a matter of how much data they're presenting to you. If they present to you more data, you just have more things to write about, and that's always great. You would not lack information, and you would definitely be able to report the features if you just compare among the different indications. Let's say if you think about this, there's a visible difference when it comes to the percentage of a certain nutrient over breakfast, dinner, lunch, and snacks. For example, if you look at the added sugar end, you can clearly see that the added sugar is it's found the most in snacks rather than, the other ends, right? The other types of meals. So definitely you can find these main features, and we would discuss at length about how to find out, how to read through charts, how to read the data. Because see, it's always about the writing process, and that's absolutely very important. But before going to the writing process, it's really important for us to remember that you have to be able to read your data correctly. Otherwise, if you don't have a logical order in your mind, if you don't have the clarity in your mind, the very same clarity would not be reflected on paper or on, let's say, the digital screen, basically, wherever you write. So it's really important for us to be able to read the data correctly in order for us to interpret the data correctly. So moving on to the other types, here we have the line graphs. The line graphs are definitely another frequent type of question that you come across, a frequent type of data visualization that you come across. So line graphs come along, of course, individually or in mixed types, or multiple line graphs are there as well. So basically any type can come individually or in a mixed set or in multiple numbers. You do it for pie, you do it for bar chart, you do it for maps, you do it for the line graphs. It's pretty much the same thing. If you have more data visualization, if you have more sets, if you have more charts, you simply have more data to interpret. That's simply what it is, right? Now here, if you look at this, we have a singular one, and again, the instructions been given. It says the graph below shows the average carbon dioxide emissions per person in the UK, Sweden, Italy, and Portugal. So they've given you these places. Between, again, two dates have been mentioned, 1967 and 2007, and you're supposed to, again, summarize the information by selecting and reporting on the main features. Now, look at this. They always talk about the main features and comparisons where relevant, because that's what it is. You don't elaborate a summary. You summarize the information. You always read the data. You understand the data. You interpret the data, and then you make it the easiest and the most concise summary possible. Because a summary is not, unlike the essay, not about elaborating on your viewpoint. It's really just about reading through the data and presenting it in a concise manner for someone to read. And always the language should be somehow very simple or plain, because a summary is not about boasting your vocab, right? So again, if you look at this, we have different indicators. We have, of course, these 4 places: the UK, the Sweden, Italy, and Portugal. We have the range of years given. So it's not 2 specific years, but rather a range. You have 1967, 77, 87, 97, and 2007. So we have a decade's difference between each. So you can always find differences over a matter of 10 years. How did the CO2 emission per country or per place go up or down? It's a per capita emission, if you see. Emissions per person, which means it's per capita. So per capita emission over the period of a decade between each of these years, how did it change, and if it's gone up, if it's gone down, what was the peak for a country, what was the lowest point, has it improved, has it declined. Okay, so we would be going through each data based on the nature of the data, and it really is not exactly about the visualization per se. Of course, every type of chart has its own way of reading through it, right? But nonetheless, the basic things always remain the same. So in our masterclass, we would always try to simplify rather than complicate things for you. If you simplify, you can always understand that there are essentially just a few ways to understand any data or any visualization of any sort. You don't have to remember thousands of rules, thousands of different tricks and tips in order for you to have a good score. Of course, writing matters, and we would be discussing about presentation, syntax, your sentences, of course, how you write and how you express yourself, because the summary or this task 1, the way you write it would be entirely different from the way you write your essay. Because the two kinds of writing, they have different rules, they have a different decorum altogether, so your expectations, the expectations are actually completely different. So again, if you go on to, let's say, another example, we can see here again we have a singular one, and this is about 2 years, again, a range of years, 2010 to 2017. So of course we have the topic given, which is the number of tourists visiting a particular Caribbean island. And look at the indications here. They have given you visitors staying on cruise ships, they've given you visitors staying on island, and total. So the total is definitely combining these two, which they have given in separate terms. So this is the total, this is your cruise ships one, and this is your island. So you have different indications given, and based on how you read, you would be making sense of it. If you think about it, the total is just a combination of the two given, this one and this one. So if you just focus on the way it's going up or down, it would also give you an insight as to what the ratio looks like, how the total is really divided, when what trend is going up, when visitors are really just preferring to stay on the island, and when the tourists are really preferring to stay on the cruise ships. So based on that, you can make up a short summary of 200, 250, maximum 300 words, right? The words really don't make much impact. Now, there's usually a question that should we be writing exactly, let's say, 150 words or more? It really depends on how much information there is. So as long as your main features are not satisfied, you would definitely write as much as is required. And we can assure you, because the data is not much, so even if you write all the main features, it would definitely not exceed more than 300, hardly. So that's why you don't have to think too much about exceeding, but you should definitely think about going beyond the main, the minimum limit, because you have to meet the minimum word limit. Otherwise, you're at a loss. So, moving on, exploring the different types of questions here. We also have, again, multiple presentation here. We have multiple charts here, multiple line graphs. Here, what's the topic? They have given you the topic that the charts below show the changes in ownership of electrical appliances and amount of time spent doing housework in households. So it's all about chores, right? So they're talking about chores and how much time you're taking, or these households basically, the overall time to do chores between the year 1920 and 2019. So you have two different ones, and one is about the percentage of households with electrical appliances between these two, whereas the next one is about the number of hours of housework per week. So you have to coincide the data and simply see how one has gone up and the other one's gone down. So definitely the existence of the appliances have had some impact on the average weekly hours, which was needed to do the chores or housework in general. So again, reading the data is really important. If you read clearly, if you understand clearly, you don't have to struggle a lot in writing. you would only struggle a lot in writing first thing if you do not have a clear indication of what's going on in the data. And even if, let's say, you allow yourself to use all the strategies there are, unless your mind is clear about what you're supposed to write, there's no way you can put them in a logical order. So it's really important. The first baby step is to understand how to read any sort of data visualization, right? So we would go at length into how to effectively read, and then how to organize those, let's say, the pieces of information in a logical order based on what kind of information it is, right? So how the main features relate to one another, what sort of logical order should there be, and how it would be the most efficient to present them in what order, right? The order is really important. When it comes to the summary, the logical order that you present your data in is really important, because it really shows you or to the reader how the reader maybe can read through your summary and understand the data without even looking at the visualization. Really, that's your motto, right? So we would go at length into elaborate on these tactics, elaborate on these strategies, and mostly the skills, right? We're talking about the skills here. So many different kinds of variations. Again, we have here, again, there's a date range. So this is something of common thing that you find. So you have these differences between timeline, because timeline is simply something which would be there on a line graph thing. So when it comes to a line graph, a line chart presentation, you would always have some sort of timeline difference or some sort of change happening, because it essentially talks about change, right? There is a change, there is an increase, there's a decrease, something is going on. And what you need to do is you just need to observe the points, the peak points, if it's gone to the bottom, if it's declining, what's the rate of decline, right? Those essential features are what you're focusing on. And 20 minutes, frankly speaking, would be more than enough if you can efficiently utilize the time. The 20 minutes are more than enough because if you can efficiently read the data, it would not take you much time to actually write it. The reading of the data and mentally focusing on how to logically present the data usually takes the most time. And if you can read the data while simultaneously making up your mind as to how to present it, and then simultaneously again you go on writing, right? That would be the best thing, and that would save you a lot of time. And even though right now you might feel that no, whatever ma'am's telling us, it really sounds easy, but it's difficult to do. It is probably difficult to do because you've either not have had you've not had enough practice, or else it's simply because you do not know exactly how to approach this, right? So first we would learn how to approach. The approach matters a lot when it comes to the writing task 1. And again, we would have to polish our writing ability, because without polishing your abilities, just going through 1,000 different tips or tricks would not save your test, right? So this is something you would absolutely have to remember. And we would swear by the, let's say, the implications of a good writing ability on any of your writing task 1 or writing task 2 performance, right? So it really depends. Okay, now we have again some other examples. We have bar charts. So bar charts are again a very frequent type that you come across, right? And here, these are all Cambridge examples, by the way, right? So these are official examples that you can follow. And this is about, what is this about? What's the topic? Let us look into it. This is the topic. This is about the results of a survey about people's coffee and tea buying and drinking habits in 5 Australian cities. So you have Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Hobart, right? So you have 5 places. And you have what? You have the 3 things. You have the coffee and tea buying habits, drinking habits, right? And for coffee and tea individually, right? So you have basically 2 things, 2 indications, buying and drinking of coffee and tea. And for 3, okay, so there are 3 patterns When it comes to it, there's fresh coffee bought in last 4 weeks. There's instant coffee bought in last 4 weeks. And there are those people who have visited a cafe for coffee or tea in last 4 weeks. So we have these 3 indications. For each, if you can just visibly see, just take a moment to look at the data here, to look at the presentation. What strikes the most, just visibly, would be what's the one thing which is always higher than the rest, which is the last one, that is went to a cafe for coffee or tea in the last 4 weeks. That's always higher. You have it here, you have it here, you have it here as well, and here as well. Only exception to the rule would be Adelaide, right? So you have only exception to the rule happening in this place, whereas all the rest of the 4 have it the other way around. Now again, for the same, just in the same way, for the second indication, that is, bought instant coffee, the trend bought instant coffee in last 4 weeks, that is usually always the second highest when it comes to pretty much all places, apart from, again, the 4th one mentioned. And if you look at the other one, bought fresh coffee in last 4 weeks, that's always down. So there's no exception to the rule when it comes to the first one, that the bought fresh coffee in last 4 weeks is always down, and the top one that you can find happens to be in Sydney. So according to the place, you can have a certain logic or interpretation, right? According to the peak points or general trend, like out of the 3, which one's the highest generally? So the highest generally, which one is that? That's the 3rd one usually, with of course the exception. Exceptions are important for you to point out. And then of course it comes to the place-based indication, that which place had usually the most going, and also the other 2, the bought fresh coffee in the 4 weeks and bought instant coffee in the last 4 weeks, how are they faring? So categorical trends, and in each category, what's the highest point, what's the lowest point, what's the change city to city, because this is not about time. There's no timeline. This is place-wise comparison or category-wise comparison. So it really again depends on the data, how the data is presented, and how you're supposed to read it, and then logically present it in the easiest possible manner. Okay, now moving on to another one. So this one's about information about how families in one country spend their weekly income in 1968 and in 2018. So you have specifically 2 years given, 1968 and 2018. 2 different years, right? And you're supposed to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons, again, where relevant. And if you see, they have given you average weekly spending by families in food, housing, fuel, clothing and footwear, household goods, personal goods, transport, leisure, really the basics of life, right? Now each of these would be something that you would have to touch upon based on if they're significantly changing, if they have a certain pattern, right? If you look at this whole thing, just brush past it, right, just eyeball the data, you would understand the most equal representation is in household goods. So in household goods, there's been no change between these 2 years when it comes to the spending, the expenditure, right? So it's been pretty much the same. Now, what's the highest difference that you find, the most change? You can definitely find that the most change has been somewhere either in food, of course, that's quite visible, right? And of course in leisure also there's been a significant change. In housing there's been a significant change. In clothing and footwear there's been some change, and the others also going somewhat into this direction. So it is again categorical differentiation as well as temporal or time-wise differentiation. So you're talking about the category, each category in relation to a certain year versus another, and how the changes happened. What is the most change? What is the least change? Where you have no change at all, like we have in household goods, and how you can maybe infer a few things from that. Now, sometimes we can infer things from the data, sometimes we can't. If you can infer, that's always the best, because you can always just like add that inference in your conclusion, maybe in the concluding remark. It really helps. It helps the examiner understand that you can actually read the data, right? Rather than simply just parroting the features. That's it, right? Now, again, we have so many variations, and look at this. We have a mixed sort here, right? And as you can see, we have a this topic. They've given the chart below shows the value of one country's exports in various categories during 2015 and 16. Table shows the percentage change in each category of exports in 2016 compared with 15. Of course, another comparison. Comparisons are so common, right? And it's really the whole part of data that you compare some sort of change, some sort of up and down trend, and so on. So again, we have export earnings for 2015 to 16. They have given that in billions of dollars. So that's a dollar sign, of course, and that's billions for you. Always keep in mind that you have to look at the unit correctly. If there's a certain unit given in millions, billions, pounds, dollars, euros, you would have to read it correctly. If you do not read it correctly, of course, you would lose score on that, right? So, okay, and we have the categories. We have petroleum products, we have engineered goods, we have gems and jewelry, we have agricultural products, and we have textiles. And of course, we have a table down below which says percentage change in values. So petroleum products have had a 3% increase, engineered goods have had a 8.5% increase, gems and jewelry 5.18% decrease or downfall, and agricultural products again. So every category has had increase apart from gems and jewelry. So exceptions are always something that you would focus on. Apart from, of course, the highest change and the lowest change, or the highest, like gain as such, or else the decline. So 3 things: the highest versus lowest points, the exceptions, or the lack of change, or let's say the constant, or the constancy, let's say the constant factor, constancy. So these are usually the things that you look at. Okay. Now, again, it really depends on the data, and we have to be able to read our data correctly. Now, when it comes to diagrams, diagrams are probably one of the easiest sort that you find in the writing task 1, because diagrams are usually given in a flow chart manner, in a very visual way that you can clearly trace through each step, and it's just about reporting the steps, and that's pretty much it. You don't have comparisons going on here, you don't have a temporal distinction, you don't have things changing, you don't have like high points, low points, declines, addition, right? You have nothing of that. It's simply a matter of tracing through steps, and probably there are lots of students who struggle with meeting the minimum word limit when it comes to the diagram, because diagrams have not much information when it comes down to it. So, but then it's not going to be an issue if you're able to express yourself correctly. So we would also talk at length about how you're supposed to write, what are the essential, because see, there's a lot of information available as to how you're supposed to format your writing. The format is a very standard format, but it really again depends on your sentence construction, your choice of words, and of course the choice of words do not have to be too complicated, because you're doing a summary. A summary is supposed to summarize, it's supposed to be concise. So any sort of tautology, any sort of roundabout language is something you should be staying clear of, you should be wary of, right? So again, let us look at this. we are looking at what? We're looking at this diagram which shows how instant noodles are manufactured. So it's given in really like clear steps. There are 8 clear steps. As we can see, there's the storage silos, right? There's the mixer, then there's dough sheets being prepared, of course, then the strips being made, then the noodle discs, and then the cooking or the drying thing happening. Then of course the vegetables and spices being added to the cups, and the labeling and sealing, and that's pretty much it, right? So it's a clear tracing of steps, and in diagram, steps are all that you have. There's nothing more to it as such. If you can just express your summary in this step-by-step manner, then you are probably going to have a good score, as long as your writing is consistent and it's logical and it has it makes sense, right? So pretty much it's the easiest kind of writing task 1 question that you can come across. Similar to this, if you can see, this one shows the manufacturing process for making sugar. Again, clear steps traced. There are total 7 steps, as we can see, right? There's the growing of the sugar cane, of course. They have given you the timeline for that. Then there's the harvesting procedure, pretty visual terms. Then there's the crushing, then there's the purifying the juice, of course, right? And then evaporation, of course, so that it becomes syrup, and then that syrup's used to, of course, extract sugar crystals, and how the drying and cooling is then the last step, pretty much, right? So just tracing the steps usually does it for the diagrams. There's nothing much to it. There's no main feature per se apart from the steps. Maybe some inferences which can be drawn, but hardly any. So diagrams are usually the easiest sort that you come across when you do the writing task 1. Now we would talk about the diagrams again, but mostly diagrams would be really easy for you to go through. But first, usually the most difficult part that students come across or stumble upon would be the maps. Now maps have notoriously been a difficult, a stumbling block for most students, because of course, why not directions, right? Directional and positional elements. Now if you look at one of them, so again we have, what is this? This is about the Southwest Airport, some sort of airport here. They've given it a name, now and after development. So again, this is not a temporal distinction. This is a distinction between, let's say, before a phenomena, after a phenomena, right? Something like that. So it's before and after refurbishment. Like right now you have so and so and so features, and this is like the floor plan, some sort, right? The whole design, what amenities you have and all that listed. So you have a check-in, you have a cafe, you have a walkway, you have gates, like pretty simple, pretty minimalist, right? But on the other hand, after redevelopment or refurbishment, you have this check-in thing, you have backdrop, you have cafe, ATM, SkyTrain, car hire, and gates, of course, right? The gates also increase. Now basically it's a matter of the changes again, or the additions and alterations which take place before and after the redevelopment. And nonetheless, there's no temporal distinction. There's a yearly difference, pretty much. They say that plans show the site of an airport now and how it will look after redevelopment next year. So there's probably a yearly change, so a year apart. The changes that would take place, and this is a projected change. None of this has happened yet. This is projected, right? So this is in future. So again, in terms of temporal distinction, we have this before and after, and the before and after is between present and future, not between past and present. So we have some times between past and present, we have some times between present and future. You have to be really sure about what sort of temporal distinction you're making. If it's between past and present, the tense that you would be using would differ. And when you're using future and present, of course, the tense would be accordingly used. So it would really depend upon you figuring out what would be the best fit. Now, coming to another example, you can see clearly that again we have two maps here, right? We have the map of an industrial area in the town of Norbiton and planned future development of the site. So again, this is about future. So present versus future. And things are changing quite a few. There's a drastic change, right? We have quite a few changes happening. You would have to really touch upon each major change, and you have directions. Now, usually students stumble upon the directional element. Now, what is northeast to what, and what's south to what, and what's in the south, what's in the north. So you have to be really comfortable in using positional variants. You have to be really comfortable when using directional words or expressions. And we would do a whole segment on that. So we would talk about how to effectively express directions of any kind, how to effectively express changes or alterations in a map, in a positioning of something. Maybe on a certain map there was a hospital, maybe at a certain junction, and then it was removed or maybe expanded into a different direction. So of course you would always have to point out major changes which are taking place in its position or direction, or if it's expanded into, if it's altered, something else has been put into its place, right? So whatever changes they're happening. So changes are really an essential part of what you usually report on in your summary, right? It could be temporal change, positional change, element changes, category changes, percentile changes, any sort of change that you're talking about, right? So changes are really important for you to notice. Now, again, this one is a fairly simple and a visual representation of a simple park. This place is called Grange Park. They've given it a time, right? They've given it 1920, and then they've given today. So the today could be today. Basically, it's present, right? We would take today as present versus this is past. So past corresponds to 1920, and present would simply correspond to the present in which the student is writing. Your present, basically, right? If somebody is dealing with this in 2023, that was their present, and if someone would be dealing with it in 2024, then that is going to be their present, right? So the present will change according to the student's present. But nonetheless, it basically talks about how the tense is going to be. It's an indicator of the tense. Now, again, they talk about the topic. They say that it's about a public park when it was first opened in 1920, and the same park today, and of course the changes which have happened. So all of these places are given: Rose Garden, the entrance, and there, of course, you have a certain directional element going on here, right? Then you have the Rose Garden again, changes happening. There's the cafe here now. There was the pond for water plants. Now it's children play area. You have a water feature added, which was not there. You have a fountain, which is now the Rose Garden with seats on four ends, right? So here you don't have a north or a east or a south consideration. You have more of the relative one. So maybe from the center to its left, to the right, to its north, to its left, to the maybe the opposite, right? So you have a relative directional element going on here. You don't have exactly directions because we don't exactly know the entrance is positioning its position to the north or the south, or what the direction is like, right? So we would have to really talk about relative positions and directions, and how these element changes are happening, right, relatively to each other. So again, so many variations when it comes to the different kinds of data presented, and ultimately when we're summarizing this whole series of questions or the examples that we just went through from the official Cambridge books, we can understand that we have all these different kinds of visualization. We have pie charts, we have line graphs, we have diagrams, maps, tables, right? We have bar charts, right? But then you have sometimes them we have them in individual order, we have them in comparison to each other, mixed sets, multiple sets. Whatever they are, there's always some change happening. There's always some high and low point to discuss. There's some alterations happening. You would always have to understand the main features. You would always have to find the correct logical order to discuss the main features. And again, if you can properly interpret the data, there's no way you cannot write it simply. So moving on into our masterclass series, when we would in the free masterclass, we would bump into maybe just one particular type, and we would talk about the essential skills more, because see, the essential skills are going to be important for any type. So regardless the category, we don't have to really talk about the category per se. We have to first talk about the ability. If you can polish your ability, if you can polish the skills, there's no way you can go wrong in any category. You're dealing with any type of data visualization. It would be all the same if you can read the data, if you can form a logical order of the points, and if you can summarize effectively in clear and plain English, because really we're talking about a summary and it's not an essay, right? So stay tuned. We would be going live soon enough. We have masterclass series classes going on every week. So if you want to participate, just let us know. You have the contact information given to you. You can get in touch with us anytime and simply let us know if you're eager to participate. Okay, so stay tuned, keep watching, and keep learning.